wonderful world of sewing on your new white sewing machine. I'm Sue Hausman, host of the America Sews Public Television sewing series, and White Sewing Machines has asked me to teach you how to use your new white 1866. I would suggest you take it out of the box and set it on a firm surface. Your kitchen table would be great, and it has a wonderful carrying handle that folds away when you're not using it for carrying. You'll want to wipe off the surfaces in case they have any lint or oil on them from shipping, and then you'll be ready to take the foot control and cord assembly and plug in your new white sewing machine. As you go to the right side, you'll see that the foot control plug is notched and ready to go into place. You plug the other end into the wall, and you're ready to sew. As soon as you turn on your white sewing machine with the little button at the bottom, turn it on, and that turns on power and the light to illuminate your sewing work. Now, just quickly, to make your sewing machine sew, you will step on a foot control. I have it up here so you can see it. The harder you push on the foot control, the faster your white sewing machine will sew. We're going to put it on the floor, and you'll be running it with your foot control. And first, we want to talk a little bit about some of the other extras. In the side of the styrofoam in the box, there is a wonderful extension. I call this the flathead extension and storage. It simply slides in place to the left, and now you have a much larger sewing surface when you're doing a big project. Slide it off. First you slide it on to the right, slide it off to the left, and you'll notice that concealed inside is a storage tray for all of your accessories. You simply grip it and slide it out. It's actually a pivot tray. You can take it off to put it back in. You simply put that little pin in the corner and slide it back in. I actually like to leave mine setting by my machine because I find it easy to use. You can sew with or without the extension tray. Without it, you have the free arm, and we'll be talking more about that later. But the first thing we want to do is teach how to wind a bobbin. And there is a bobbin in your accessories, and you have a little felt pad that can be placed under the spool. So we'll pull up the spool pin, and we'll place the little felt pad underneath the thread. And any type of quality sewing thread will work just fine on your white sewing machine. I'm going to place my spool on the spool pin, and I'll be prepared to place the bobbin on the bobbin winder spindle. But what I'd like to first show you is that you saw a minute ago, when I step on the foot control now, my needle goes up and down. There's another way to make the needle go up and down, and that's by turning the hand wheel. I want to keep the needle from going up and down while I'm winding a bobbin. So what I'm going to do is grip the hand wheel with my left hand and turn the inner part of that wheel toward me to loosen it. Now when I step on the foot control, the needle doesn't go up and down. I'm in a bobbin winding position. I'll move that bobbin winder spindle over for you because right now nothing's happening there either. But when I move it to the right, you'll notice it turns. And of course, with a bobbin on it, when it's turning, that means we'll be winding a bobbin. So take the bobbin from your accessories and simply put it in place and turn it until it snaps down in place. It's real easy. Bring the thread from the spool around the bobbin tension disc, and that's this little disc right here. It's only used for winding a bobbin. We bring it in front of that disc, around that disc, not under that guide, just around the disc itself, and then back over to the bobbin. Put 5 or 6 turns on the bobbin in a counterclockwise direction, and then push the bobbin to the right to make it turn, and go ahead and go. And look what happens. You're actually winding a bobbin. It will stop automatically when it's fully wound, but you don't always need a full bobbin. Keep that in mind. If you're doing a quick sewing project, you might only need a few yards just to do a little mending. And of course, additional bobbins are available at your favorite fabric or sewing machine store. Okay, we'll pop that bobbin winder spindle back. We'll tighten this hand wheel now so that our needle will go up and down and we can sew. And then simply lift the bobbin off, cut the thread, and we're now ready to put the bobbin into your new white sewing machine. And that's real easy to do too, because you simply open the bobbin door cover, and once you've done that, you see the bobbin case, and the bobbin's inside that case. Take a hold of this little hinged finger and pull out the bobbin case. Now when you're holding that little finger out, the bobbin is actually held in the case. When you let go of that little finger, the bobbin falls out. We're prepared now to insert the bobbin into the bobbin case. We'll take the bobbin we just wound, we'll place it so that the thread is coming over the top of the bobbin, and we'll drop the bobbin into that case. And then I want you to take note of the little slot right on the side of the bobbin case, because the thread needs to go into that little slot, just like that. It's very easy. And then up into what we call the bobbin tension spring. And you can actually hear it click in there. Now you can see that as you pull the thread, the bobbin will turn clockwise. Now remember, when we're not holding that little hinge, that bobbin will fall out. So before we go to put that bobbin case into the machine, we're going to grab that little hinge again so that it holds the bobbin in place. Then we're going to position the bobbin with this finger up, and we're going to push it onto the bobbin little spindle that's in there, push it in place, but you can't have it flopping around like that. You have to push it in tightly till it clicks in place, and it won't click in place unless you have that finger up correctly. Okay, once the bobbin's threaded, close that bobbin door. And now we're ready to thread the top part of the machine. And this is just as easy. First, we'll take the thread out of that bobbin tension disc, because we only use that for winding the bobbin. But the first two thread guides are actually a part of this total guide. So bring the thread from the spool pin behind that guide, pull it forward, up, and then back. That will slot it right into this guide on the left side very easily. Now bring the thread over the guide on the left, which is this one right here. Bring it from the back over that guide. Hold on to the thread with your right hand and lay it into the tension discs. These are actually the discs that will close when you put the presser foot down and will put tension on the thread. So lay it on either side of that tension disc, and then down under the check spring. Now I'm going to open the faceplate door so that you can see a little bit better. Right here, under that check spring. And now I think you can see that as I came under there, that guide has a little spring in it that needs to go up and down and control the tension of the thread. The next step is the take-up lever. And you want to bring the thread in front of that little knob on it, and then pull it forward, and it slots right into it so easily. I do want to point out that it's possible to do that wrong if you aren't paying attention, because it happened to me yesterday. I went too low, and you see how it looks, I think I have it threaded, but it isn't. So we want to be sure when we come up to the take-up lever to simply lay it in front of the little knob and bring it forward. And by the way, you're coming from the right and over to the left. And then down just above the door, you'll see one more guide, and then a final guide right there above the needle. Both of those are threaded from left to right. Now it's time to thread the needle. We simply cut the thread blunt with our scissors and thread the needle from front to back. And that's easy to do. Once you've threaded it, grab a hold of that end and pull the end of the thread through, and you are ready to go. Now there we have a little wrap around the needle. You don't want that. Of course, when we lower the presser foot, we have tension on the thread. The next step would be to bring up the bobbin thread. Now hold the top thread firmly with your left hand, and if you'll remember, when we pressed on the foot control, the needle went up and down. Well, there's another way to have the needle go up and down, and that is to turn the hand wheel with your hand, always turning it toward you. So I'll turn the hand wheel one full turn, and what that will mean is the needle will go down all the way and come back up. And very importantly, this take-up lever will go down and come back up. So as I turn, the take-up lever and the needle go down into the bobbin area, they come back up, and I'm going to turn until that take-up lever is back at the top position. And you'll notice that what happened, a little loop from the bobbin came up. That loop of thread is bobbin thread, and now I pull them out, and I'm ready to sew. Take that thread and place it under the presser foot and toward the back before you begin to sew. We're just about ready to sew, but I don't want to forget to teach you about the presser foot pressure adjustment. Now that's here behind the faceplate, and it's this gold lever. Presser foot pressure is how much push the foot puts on the fabric when you lower the presser foot. So when I put the presser foot down on the fabric, then I have quite a bit of push. But if I move this pressure to zero, I have very little push. Now, this would not be good for normal sewing because your fabric wouldn't feed very well. It's the pressure and the feed teeth that make the fabric feed. For very lightweight fabrics, you may want to use the setting of 1. But for normal sewing, just set this lever to 2. And for very heavy things, you could go all the way down to 3. I'm going to leave it on 2 for what we're doing today, and I would suggest that that's where you leave it at home, too. We'll close the faceplate, and now let's talk about the dials. What I love about this model is that the stitches are all pictured on the front, and then, of course, with those stitches, you can do many, many stitch functions. And the stitches are also pictured on the stitch selection dial. So what's great is you simply dial the dial to the picture of the stitch you wish to sew. It's that easy. I'm going to go back to the straight stitch. Then your stitch length determines how many stitches per inch, or how close together the stitches are. And we'll just change that and teach you for each stitch as we do it. And the reverse button right here. It's that simple to sew on your new white. So let's set a straight stitch. We'll set our length to about 2.5 to 3, and we'll place our fabric under the presser foot and lower the presser foot before you start to sew. Now I step on the foot control. You'll remember the harder I step on the foot control, the faster I sew. I do have seam guides marked along my foot, along my plate, the edge of the foot here where I want longer seams, but there would be my straight stitch. When I'm ready to remove the fabric, I want the needle up, of course, so I'll turn the hand wheel to bring the needle to the highest position, but even more important, to bring this take-up lever to the highest position so that I'm sure that my stitch has been completely formed, and then when I raise my presser foot, it's very easy to pull those threads out. Have you ever had a bunch of threads coming out? That's because the take-up lever isn't all the way up. You have a thread cutter on the back of the presser bar that makes it easy to cut that thread after you've sewn your seam. And there would be your straight seam. Now this seam would actually pull out if we don't do something at the beginning and the end. And that's where our reverse comes in. Instant reverse. You don't have to start right at the edge of a fabric ever. Start in about 1/8 of an inch. And by the way, always start with those threads under the presser foot and toward the back. And many times I even just take a hold of them as I start to sew. I'll start to sew my straight stitch, but to tie it off or knot it, I'm going to press firmly down on the instant reverse. As long as I'm holding that reverse down, my machine is sewing backwards. So you will then be knotting off or tying off at the beginning by taking a reverse stitch. Now, should you want to change directions as you're sewing, it's called pivoting, we would turn the needle, and remember to turn that hand wheel always toward you, turn the needle until it's in the fabric, raise the presser foot, turn the fabric, lower the presser foot, and we're ready to sew again. And when you get to the end of that seam, again, press down on that reverse, and as long as you're holding it down, it will reverse stitch. Now we're ready to remove fabric. Take-up lever is up, and we simply pull our fabric out, and there we've done our tie-off stitch and pivoting. One other thing I really like this reversing for is if you have a hole. Here's a pair of jeans that I've actually cut a hole in it, but I wouldn't be surprised if you might see some at your house. And this is what the free arm is so great for. You can slide those jeans, that leg, right over the free arm. To stitch over the little hole in our jeans, we simply lower the presser foot, stitch forward, and when we've crossed over the hole, press down on the reverse button. Let it up, let it back and forth by pressing up and down on the reverse button. And you'll see that you can actually mend over a tear with thread in table linens, in dish towels, in towels, and also in a pair of jeans like we have here. Raise that take-up lever to the top, pull it out, and you see how we have mended our hole with stitching. Now another thing that the straight stitch is used for is putting in zippers. And with your right, you received a zipper foot. You'll notice I'm not going to show how to put in a zipper. I hope you'll sign up for a sewing class at your local store for that. But with the standard foot, we can't get real close to those zipper teeth when we sew. So you have received a zipper foot that allows you to sew close. But we have to get this on. Well, changing the feet on your white sewing machine is simple. You simply press the little lever at the back of the ankle, and off drops the foot. The ankle stays in place. Now, there are bars on the feet, and in the case of the zipper foot, there's a long bar because we can actually snap the zipper foot on to the left, which would allow us to get it close on the left, or we can snap it on to the right. So we'll snap it off by touching the button, and snapping it on is as simple as lining up that bar with the little slot in the ankle and lowering the presser foot down on it. It picks that foot up immediately, and now you see that if we wanted to sew close on the right side of the zipper, we could do that as well by simply snapping over to the other side. The straight stitch is also used for top stitching and other decorative type sewing. These jeans, for example, actually did belong to one of my family, and you'll see that I've done a top-stitched hem because I had to cut them off to make them shorter. This is easy to do, and we will snap on our regular foot again for that. We'll put our zipper foot back in our little accessory tray so we know where it is next time. Again, line up the pin on the foot with the slot on the ankle, bring the ankle down, and it snaps right in and picks up the foot. It's that easy to change the feet. Now you can press this hem in place or pin it in place. I've just turned up a double hem on the bottom of my jeans fabric. Always start with those threads under the foot and toward the back. You get into that habit, you'll save yourself a lot of frustration in your sewing. And now we've lowered the presser foot and we're ready to start sewing. One thing, I'm at a normal stitch length here. And you can do top stitching and hems with a normal stitch length, but many times you want it to look a little bit prettier, or your stitch to be a little bit longer. And so to do that, we would simply turn our stitch length dial from the 2.5, which is normal sewing, 10 to 12 stitches per inch, to maybe 3.5 or even 4, which brings you up to a very long stitch length of about 6 to 8 stitches per inch. And now we would just sew our hem in place, and we could backstitch at the end to make sure it wouldn't come out. Again, turn the hand wheel, bring that take-up lever up to remove those fabrics, and there you see our hem all stitched in place on our jeans. It's that easy for you to shorten those jeans for your kids or your husband, or even for yourself. Now this long stitch, of course, is much easier to pull out when you're doing a temporary sewing. We call it basting, and you might want to baste a garment together to see how it fits before you sew it. Or you might want to baste in a sleeve or baste in a zipper. And so I have two pieces of fabric that I'm going to baste together. And I've got my straight stitch, that long length, and I'm simply going to sew my seam, in this case, with an extra long stitch called a basting stitch. Now you'll see that we could certainly try this on, but you'll see why we probably wouldn't want that for a garment. We have kind of a gapy seam there. But it makes it easy to remove by using a long stitch. We would simply take and snip a few stitches on the right side, especially if we had a really long one to pull out, and then take a hold of our bobbin thread. It's longer at this end, so I'll pull it from there, and just pull that thread right out, and you can see now that our basting is removed, making it easy now to make a change in size or to maybe set in that sleeve again for practice. We use that extra long basting stitch for gathering too. And I've got an example of a little gathered ruffle here. This is what I mean. This fabric actually was gathered up before it was set into our little pillow. And so to gather, we would set our white to the extra long straight stitch, that 4 stitch length, which is 6 stitches per inch. And then we would start with those threads under the foot and to the back. And in this case, be sure you leave some tails on the thread. You'll always want at least 3 to 4 inches back there, but you may even want a little more for basting because you're going to be pulling up on those threads. Now I'll run 2 rows. We'll run 1 row first, again end with that up, leave some tails to pull, and then we'll run a second row about 1/4 inch from the first, and again this isn't fussy, it doesn't have to be at any certain distance. And what we do then is simply take a hold of the 2 bobbin threads, one row stitching and the other row stitching, and now we pull up on those bobbin threads, and you'll see how that will gather our fabric. And we can adjust those gathers by simply moving them around as we pull on the bobbin threads. Lots of patterns call for gathering or easing. Easing is just less gathering. You don't pull them up quite as much, but you would use that long stitch for easing as well. The last thing I'd like to talk about is quilting. Quilting is so popular, and your new white will do wonderful quilting. This is actually our little white quilted friendship sign-up quilt. And if you go to the White website at www.whitesewing.com, the complete instructions for making this little quilted autograph quilt are on that website. Now, the first thing you do on most quilts is actually piece the pieces together, and that's done with a 1/4 inch stitch seam allowance, and you have a very special foot that came with your white. We're going to snap off the standard sewing foot and snap on, and you see how easy that is, the 1/4 inch quilter's foot. And you'll see how it's a narrower foot. I also want to point out that it has a single hole only, so it could only be used for straight stitch, okay? Normally we would piece somewhere in the 2.5 stitch length, and we would place that fabric with the edge of the fabric right at the edge of that piecing foot. Hold on to those threads perhaps as you start off so that you've got those held well, and then just piece your fabrics together to create your quilt. Now again, as we raise the fabric out, pull the fabric out, we'll raise that take-up lever. And now you see how we've stitched a perfect 1/4 inch scant seam for piecing that quilt. The other thing that, of course, quilting involves is actually taking the fabric and laying it onto a batting.
Be careful.
And in this case, we have one of the heavier, fluffier polyester battings. We would normally baste our quilt to the batting, and now we might use a slightly longer stitch length, maybe 2.5 to 3, and now you would simply stitch your quilt to quilt the sandwich, they call it, the sandwich of batting and fabric, to quilt it together with stitching. Of course, this traditionally was done by hand, and now we do it very quickly, very easily on the White sewing machine. Now that we've seen a number of the different stitch functions with the straight stitch, let's experiment with some of the other stitches on your new white. Well, the first thing, we will remove our quilting sample, and I'm going to take off that special foot for quilting because you'll notice that it has a single hole, and we're going to do a zigzag, so we need to be able to have the needle swing in the foot. If we tried that with that quilting foot, we'd have a broken needle. So I'll snap on our standard sewing foot, and now we'll take a look at those different zigzag stitches. Actually, you have a 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter, and 5 millimeter zigzag. And so you select that zigzag with your stitch dial. So I simply am going to select my 2 millimeter zigzag, and we'll use a stitch length just for demonstration of about 1.5. And as we lower the presser foot and begin to sew, you'll see that now, instead of just a straight stitch, the needle swings from side to side, creating that zigzag stitch. And I'm sure you can see that that's a narrow zigzag, 2 millimeters. Well, how about a wider one? Let's try setting our stitch selector dial all the way to the widest, which is the 5 millimeter zigzag. And now as we sew, you can see that the needle swings much further to the left, much further to the right, creating a very wide zigzag stitch. Now I'd like to stitch a zigzag for you showing the different lengths of zigzag stitch. These are different widths of stitch. So we'll move to a different piece of fabric, and when we sew on a single weight with any kind of a decorative stitch or any kind of a wide stitch, it's best to use one of the tearaway stabilizers underneath so that you don't get any puckering or tunneling of the fabric. But let's leave our stitch at the wide width and leave our length for the beginning at about a 2. But as I change the length from 2 to 3 to 4, you'll notice that my zigzag stitch gets very far apart. Now this could be used decoratively, it could be used for finishing, but the place that I would use our zigzag the most, I think, is for satin stitching. And that's a very, very short stitch length. So now as I'm sewing, I'm changing my stitch length down into the 1 and down into this pink range, which is what we call a satin stitch range. And let's take a look at that stitch where we see a very, very dense stitch. Now, we've changed it from very long to very short. If this stitch builds up too much as an applique, our standard foot doesn't want to feed over it because it's very flat on the bottom or underside of the foot. So let's take a look at some appliques so we know what we're talking about. Here you see an applique that's done with a more open zigzag. And by the way, this pillow is another one of the projects on the White website at whitesewing.com. You could take a pillow and add an applique. You could take a blouse that you already own and add a pretty little applique. And here you see that very satiny stitch. You'll want to experiment with some different types of thread. For many types of decorative work, the rayon, silvery, kind of sulky-looking threads that have a lot of shine to them are the ones that you'll use for the prettiest satin stitch. You have a wonderful foot with your new white called the special purpose or the applique foot or decorative foot, which has a tunnel on the underside. That means that because it has a little tunnel, it'll feed over that buildup of stitches. I'm going to snap that on, and you'll notice because it's a transparent foot, you can see a lot better as you stitch around your heart. Don't push or pull the fabric. Let your beautiful white sewing machine feed it as you sew, and then simply satin stitch all the way around the applique. Well, the next thing that I'd like to actually talk about is the buttonhole. You know, a buttonhole actually is a satin stitch. And in this case, we have a simple buttonhole on your beautiful white sewing machine. We're going to dial the picture of the buttonhole, which is actually shown in pink, and it compares to the pink here, and it says step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. Obviously, we want to start with step 1. And our stitch length for the buttonhole needs to be short so that it's a satin stitch. Again, I would always make a sample buttonhole before I would go to making buttonholes on the garment. But we'll set the actual stitch length in the buttonhole range. Do you see where it says BH? And it's color-coded to be the pink area of the stitch length dial. Now, you have a great buttonhole foot that has come with your white, and you simply snap off the foot you have on the machine and snap on that buttonhole foot. And in this case, we are going to snap it on with the white blank back there, the little red marking lines to the front. Now, the neat thing is we can actually determine the size of our buttonhole by laying the button on the foot, and you'll notice the little red lines. We would pick the line next after the button. I usually pick the one more unless it's a really thick button. So I'm going to be sewing to this line as I stitch my buttonhole. Place the fabric underneath. Before you lower the presser foot, be sure the foot is pulled all the way forward. And then simply lower the presser foot and begin sewing. And now you will be sewing in step 1, the left side of the buttonhole. And you sew until the little red mark on the moving part, which is actually, or not on the moving part, on the needle part, which is right at the needle, comes to the line that you had as the length of your buttonhole, or the length of your button, too. Now, before you do any changes, when you've reached that mark, be sure you take the hand wheel and raise the needle out of the fabric. If you don't do that, when you change your settings, what's going to happen is the needle will shift the fabric, and then your buttonhole will be crooked. So this is easy. Just raise the needle out, Now go to your stitch dial. We've already completed step 1, which is the left column of the buttonhole. Now we're ready for step 2, which is the bar tack. And so I'll step on the foot control and take 3 or 4 stitches. We don't want too many. If you get too big a hump there of stitching, you won't be able to feed back over it. So 3 or 4 stitches, zigzag, zigzag, and then raise the needle again before you change the dial. And now we will go from step 2 to step 3. So once you've changed to step 3, go ahead and sew, and automatically your right will reverse the stitching and will sew the right column of the buttonhole. Okay, when you get back where you started, the foot will stop moving. Be sure your needle is raised out of the fabric, and set your buttonhole setting to step 4. Step 4, of course, is the same as step 2. It's the bar tack at the end. And you want to take a few bar tacks. What I often do is go back to straight stitch and just stitch in place a little bit just to tie off my buttonhole. But you will see now that we have a beautiful buttonhole. With a little practice, do some scraps, and you will be able to do beautiful buttonholes like this too. I'm going to show you one more trick for buttonholes because of the fact that buttonholes tend to get stretched out sometimes on knits and things. So we'll do a corded buttonhole. And for this we'll use a heavy thread or a fine yarn. And we'll actually loop that over that little tiny finger that's at the back of that white foot. You can see that there. And now we'll come and slip our fabric underneath. And what we'll do is make sure the foot's pulled forward, lower the presser foot. Now we need to be sure we're set back on the actual stitch. So we go back to the buttonhole setting. We're going to do column 1 first, okay? Lay those cords straight and go ahead and sew. And magically, that column is going to stitch, that satin stitch buttonhole column, right over that cording. Ready again now to do the bar tack. Be sure the needle's out. Set your buttonhole step 2. Take 3 or 4 stitches at the end for the bar tack. Set then buttonhole step 3. And now we want to be sure we're over the cord. You can do that with your hand if you turn the hand wheel. Sure enough, it's magic because the foot's made to make it happen. We stitch that side of the buttonhole, and then we go to step 4 and stitch the end of the buttonhole. And now we have cording actually in our buttonhole. You have to pull it to the back so it pulls off the cording. We have cording actually in our buttonhole. Just pull up that loop and tie these ends off to the other side of your fabric, and you'll have a very sturdy corded buttonhole. Well, now that we have buttonholes, we have to sew on a button. And I usually like to tape my button in place. I'll actually take my button and tape it onto the fabric with one of the magic tapes, because then it won't shift around on me when I'm trying to sew through it. I'm going to use the button sewing foot, and that was included with your white. And so simply snap in place the button sewing foot. And one thing when you're snapping these feet on, be sure you don't catch the threads in the actual little ankle there. That can happen. Threads under the foot and to the back. Now we line up the button foot onto the button that's been taped in place. There's one more thing we have to do here that's really important. When we're sewing, the fabric's moving. When we sew on a button, we don't want it to move. So I'm going to actually open the bobbin door, because hidden behind that bobbin door is another little lever that's called the feed teeth drop. Now these are the feed teeth. They make the fabric move. When I push that lever down, the feed teeth are gone. They're lowered down, and now when I want to sew on a button, my button's going to stay in place. The stitch for button sewing is a zigzag that'll sew from hole to hole. And I can tell you that most buttons will be the 3 millimeter or the middle-sized zigzag, but boy, don't take a chance. What I suggest is that you lower the presser foot and take the needle and make sure that you're lined up with the holes like I'm doing here. This is a different button than what I practiced with, and you know what? The holes are further apart. And so I may need to go to a 4 millimeter zigzag. So you line up the holes in the button with the swing of the zigzag needle. Your stitch length really can be set anywhere because that controls the feed teeth. And truthfully, those feed teeth aren't functioning. They're down now. I put those 2 holes on. This is a 4-hole button. I'd actually be done if I was only on a 2-hole button. But since this is a 4-hole button, I'm going to move to the next 2 holes. And again, I'm going to line up that hole. And with a little practice, you're going to find that you can do this really quickly and really easily. Again, always walk it through with your hand before you do it with the foot control. Otherwise, you're liable to hit the button and break the needle usually. All right, once you've stitched it, again, I like to go back to a straight stitch. You'll need to make sure that you're lined up with the hole to take that straight stitch, but take a few straight stitches in place. And I'll tell you, if you have not liked sewing on buttons, and maybe your buttons come off when you sew them on by hand, I guarantee you this button is going to stay put. So get rid of those extra little threads that we trimmed, and get rid of our tape, and you have a button that's there to stay. All right, another sewing job that a lot of people have done by hand for many years, and they'd like to be able to do by machine quicker, is actually hemming garments. And we can blind hem very easily with our white sewing machine. We'll snap on the blind hem foot, and again, it goes on like so. Just clipped right into the little pin, put the threads under the foot into the back before we start to sew. When we do a blind hem, we actually fold the fabric as a hem at the ironing board is where I usually do this, and we press it well, and we put our pins in perpendicular to the hem. So it's a little bit different than when we pin a hem like this. Those pins would be in the way. We need them perpendicular because we're going to be folding this again. I like to take the first, what I call bite of the pin, the first place the pin goes in, about a 1/4 inch from the edge of the hem. And so now we take and turn that hem. This is the wrong side. Let's do this together. This is the wrong side of the hem. We're actually turning the hem under toward the right side of the garment, and we're leaving an extension of the hem sticking out. We're going to sew on that extension with what's called a blind hem stitch. Simply turn the dial to the picture of the blind hem stitch, which is a straight stitch and then a zig over, a straight stitch and then a zig over. We've got to remember to bring up those feed teeth, or we're not going to go anywhere. And I hope this doesn't ever happen to you, but there have been times that I've been sewing and I put them down and then forget to bring them up, and then I can't move. So if ever your fabric isn't feeding, that's the first thing to check. We also want to set our stitch length at about 2.5 for blind hem. I've snapped on the blind hem foot. I want to give you some tips on that, but as I place the foot underneath, or the fabric underneath the foot, you'll notice that there's a little guide on the foot. I call it a flange. It's a little guide that's going to ride along the spot where the fabric is folded back. I think you can see that. That little flange rides right along this edge. And as we sew now, it's going to stitch a straight stitch either right off the hem, which is what I'm doing now, or we can stitch it right on the hem and then the zigzag jumps over. Now you'll notice that this foot is adjustable. Let's get too much bite for a minute and show what happens. If we sew with that foot adjusted so that that swing grabs way over, we're going to see that stitch on the right side. So we adjust the foot so that the fold of the fabric, and you can test this by hand walking the stitch through, so that the fold of the fabric is just barely caught by the swing of the needle. So as we sew now, it would catch way too much there. We're going to move it closer so that it's going to catch very little fabric and now become a perfect blind hem as we sew. And here again, you can get really good at adjusting this foot so that you're just barely catching the fabric as you stitch that blind hem. You'll see now that when we look at this from the wrong side, we of course see those stitches on the hem allowance on the wrong side with that zigzag jumping over to catch on the right side. But when we look at the right side, we see barely little catches of stitching, except where we had it adjusted with the foot catching too much. Now that we've done a blind hem, let's talk a little bit about finishing seams. I'm actually going to snap off my blind hem foot and snap on the standard foot. Maybe for garment sewing in the past, you've used a zigzag when you wanted to keep things from fraying. I think we've got some good tips.